Good afternoon, and welcome to the First Friday Club of Chicago on the second Friday of April. We moved it back a week as we try to do when some of the sacred holidays in our traditions blend a little bit with the First Friday. And last week it was the time of Passover and the time of Holy Week. And so we thought, as we do, we'd move it to today. So today, April 9th, thank you so much for joining us this day. I'm Father John Cusick, and I've been chaplain to the First Friday Club, would you believe, since 1986. So we have a wonderful tradition of the first Friday of the month from October through May to gather people. Normally, under normal conditions and circumstances, we would be gathering for lunch at the Union League Club of Chicago. And hopefully, God willing, and a virus can be eliminated, we're going to try to do that again, hopefully come the fall. But because of the magic of technology, we are so thrilled to have this year continue on Zoom and have so many of you connect with us during this wonderful way of technology. In a second, I'm going to introduce Terry Stumpf, who is going to introduce our speakers. And I'm just thrilled. I think today we hit a home run. Ari and Evan Moffic happen to be friends as well as professional colleagues in ministry, plus just two absolutely wonderful human beings that I've been privileged to get to know over the last number of years. And I'm a better person because of it. And so I'm just thrilled that we can share this time. And Terry Stumpf has been on our board of the First Friday Club. And Terry, I was thinking today, if we ever have a power out, we should plug into Terry. He's got more energy to share with people than almost anybody I know. So Terry, you've been a blessing to the First Friday Club. You continue to be your energy level, your ideas. And here we are another Friday keeping this thing going. So Terry, I'm going to pass the baton to you. You're going to be the moderator for today. And go with it. It's all yours.
Thank you, Father Cusick. Again, greetings and welcome. It's springtime, and we see the blooming of spring flowers and budding leaves on the trees. We've lived a year of Lent and Good Fridays. Springtime and Easter ever rise and bring us new life and hope. This spring has been a season of religious festivals, the Jewish Passover, the Christian Easter, and the upcoming Islamic Ramadan. During the conversation, you could submit questions anytime in the QA function on your webinar. We have several questions already submitted at the time of registration. And at the end of the conversation, we have set aside a time for Q&A. With that backdrop, such as time as this, our First Friday conversation topic today centers on faith and religious traditions. Will they be relevant to future generations? Over the centuries, faith and traditions have been the common thread of worship shared by many religious groups and generations of family. Today, there's a shift in this balance. Families are witnessing their children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews withdraw from their religious communities while questioning the relevance of their beliefs. With this increasing departure, how do we prevent a spiritual void for future generations? Rabbis Ari and Evan Moffic are married and parents of two children, two daughters, Hannah and Allie. They will share their insight on this complex topic. And both have worked extensively with interfaith families who've been challenged to find a common denominator between two different religions while keeping their faith and traditions alive. And as parents, Ari and Evan will share their own personal narrative on maintaining a strong faith component in a busy family life. Rabbi Ari Moffic is a rabbi educator who partners with families to inspire learners of all ages and backgrounds to incorporate Judaism into their lives. Ari is currently the Director of Congregational Learning at Temple Bethel in Northbrook. She also served as Director of Interfaith Family Chicago, which supports interfaith couples and families exploring Jewish life and education for their children. Rabbi Evan Moffic is the spiritual leader of Congregation Solel in Highland Park with a strong commitment to interfaith families. He appears regularly as a religious commentator on Fox News and CNN. We'll give him a pass for Fox News. His latest book, First the Jews, Combating the World's Longest Running Hate Campaign, was published in 2019. The Chicago Tribune described Rabbi Moffic as a brilliant antidote to all those that divide us. He constructs bridges where others drive wedges. Before I turn the conversation over to the rabbis, Rabbi Evans and my path have intersected in the past while I worked at Fourth Presbyterian Church. We did several programs and events while he was an associate rabbi at the congregation Sinai. It's good to be with him, even though it's virtual in this live webinar. Now to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Terry. And, you know, it's funny that you should mention our earlier connection, because that's exactly where I was going to start. And first of all, it's remarkable. We were both, Ari and I are going to just first start about how we got into this work. We have sort of unique rabbinates. We both serve synagogues that have been around a long time, but we've carved kind of our own path in terms of our priorities and really love and commitment to interfaith life. And it really started back when I was the associate rabbi at Chicago Sinai. And we had a wonderful partnership with Fourth Presbyterian Church and then Old St. Pat's in the city. And we used to do interfaith seders together. And that's really how this journey began. It began by my realizing that there's a real hunger for depth and connection for people of different faiths. That we are not, it used to be that faiths were seen as kind of in competition with each other and there was an animosity towards each other. But what I encountered when I came out of the rabbinate came out of rabbinical school was a deep hunger for greater connection. We live in a world that's becoming more and more secular, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Just literally a couple of weeks ago, a study from Gallup came out that showed that for the first time in recorded history, less than 50% of Americans affiliate with any kind of religious organization or go to church or synagogue on a regular basis. And so we're living in an era in which faith is seeing, traditional measures of faith are seeing a decline. And I believe that a lot of the antidote to that can be found in the kind of interfaith depth and relationships that really have been at the core of Ari and my rabbinate, and really what Father Cusick pioneered in Chicago, along with Rabbi Alan Setcher and Rabbi Michael Sternfield and so many who really started to carve this path. And we're so grateful for that. And that's really how this all got started. And Ari's journey is a little bit different, so I'll turn it over to Rabbi Ari to tell her story.
Okay. Well, this is such an honor to be here, and we're so happy to be able to share as part of this interesting conversation. You know, Evan and I are Reform rabbis. We went to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, and they train you in Talmud, you know, and in the ancient chanting and in Torah. And we had very few conversations about supporting interfaith families. It just happened that my oldest friend growing up married someone Catholic. She grew up Jewish and she was marrying someone Catholic. And in my last year of rabbinical school as a student, I really wasn't, you know, allowed, I couldn't officiate a wedding. So the priest officiated. I got to go and offer a blessing, offer a homily as part of their ceremony. And I have to tell you, I found that whole experience so pivotal, moving, interesting, complicated, that I knew that from then on, that's all I would do. You know, so it's been now almost 15 years, you know, and we've our time at the family school at Old St. Pat's has been the heart of our rabbinate. And it's been getting to know the priests of Chicago, getting to know the Muslim clerics, Hindu officiants. I mean, it has just added such depth and richness and color to our lives, truly. And that's, we have sat with so many interfaith couples, families over these years, and we've just learned quite a bit. And so we're going to share our first insight. I think Evan's going to share something now.
Yeah, and before I do that, I just want to say, in fact, before we got on, Father Cusick, we were all talking about why is it that Chicago has such a robust interfaith community? I mean, really more than almost any other city, we have these deep connections that are allowed to, or that flourish in Chicago. And I think there are a variety of reasons. And one of them, not to flatter him too much, it's because of Father Cusick and the kind of institutions like this First Friday Club that exist. This is the kind of event that fosters that depth of conversation. And so we really are uniquely able in Chicago to have these kinds of real in-depth connections. But be that as it may, that could be a topic for another day as to why Chicago works so well in that way. But to first kind of characterize where we are in terms of interfaith life and how this fits into modern American religion, the key word that I want all of us to remember right now is fluidity. Fluidity. We are living in a time of great fluidity. And not just religion. We're going to get to religion, but think about it. Where is work and where is home right now? It used to be you leave your house, you go to work, you come home from work, you're at your house. The two are separate worlds. They're much more fluid now, aren't they? I mean, it started with computers and with cell phones and smartphones, but now it's fully become almost one for many people, where work and home have become the same. Sometimes it's fluid. Sometimes you're working, sometimes you're relaxing at home and watching TV. It's the boundary between the two is much grayer. It's much more fluid than it ever was. So between work and home. What about our public lives and our private lives? Given the rise of social media, given the video, our public and private personas are really not all that separate anymore either. I mean, we still have, zones of privacy, but that sharp line, that's becoming much, much less clear in today's world. What about a sexual identity and gender? How we understand that has become much more fluid. The idea of strict binaries, that doesn't really, that's not where many open-minded people really find themselves anymore. So a lot of the traditional binaries, work and home, male and female, public and private, those aren't as strict as they once were. Sure, there are differences. This is not to say that people aren't different and we don't have different areas of life and identities. Of course, that's what makes life beautiful. But the kind of stark binaries we once thought of, and it's not just, think of ethnicity and race, all of that, there's so much overlapping fluidity. And that idea is absolutely reshaping religion. I studied history in college, and there was a very famous book about American religion written in the 1950s called Protestant, Catholic, and Jew by Will Herberg. And the idea was that these are the three major religions of America, and they're each very separate. Occasionally they'll come together, maybe for an interfaith Thanksgiving service, but they're very separate. Jews don't really talk about Jesus. Christians don't really do Passover or have really any connection to Jewish holidays. It's very distinct. There wasn't much intermarriage. Really, the intermarriage rate in the early 1960s was less than 2%. Now it's over 70%. These were very separate spheres. That has become much, much more fluid.
And I think also, in the Jewish world, to just show you how significant this is, by and large, across non-Orthodox congregations, we don't even use the words bar and bat mitzvah anymore. Almost always now you're going to see congregations refer to these events as b'nai mitzvah or b mitzvah, children of the commandments, because we're breaking down this binary. So it really is affecting language, even the language of progressive Judaism, of trying not to reinforce binaries and just to emphasize the fluidity. And then because of, blended families and all of the beautifully, messy situations we find ourselves in, there are families with children of different religions. We celebrate multiculturalism. So fluidity, this word really has shaped how we have seen interfaith families. That, not to say that they're creating a third religion, not to say that Chrismica is, some kind of blending or fluidity of secular commercialism is our goal, but much more fluid in conversation. So where it used to be that a rabbi might say, just, whatever you do, pick one religion so that you don't confuse your children. Or as long as you're raising children exclusively Jewish, then we can bless. That concept is really gone for a lot of people, because we are a mix and a blend of many, many things. We're raising children with Judaism and with appreciations for other holidays that other members of the family are celebrating.
Mm. That's exactly right. The kind of, at least in rabbinical school, and I think many rabbis continue to feel the same way. And I don't criticize how people have their own philosophical views and their own religious sense of what's appropriate and what's not. So this is not to say that one is absolutely right and one is absolutely wrong. This is more our own experience. And some rabbis I deeply respect have different points of view. But previously, when two people of a different faith had children, there was a lot of pressure to say, how are you going to raise that child? Is it going to be Jewish or is it going to be Catholic? I think a lot of parents felt pressure to do one or the other when they really didn't know. And anyone who is alive knows that life doesn't always turn out the way we expected it to. That's the truth of human existence. And truthfully, our kids don't turn out as we expected them to. Religious life doesn't always turn out as we expected them to. And so we really embrace the approach of, you have a fluidity. You have the ability to do both. I mean, that's one of the beauties. Again, that's one of the amazing things about Chicago is our family school, where that old St. Pat's, where people really can do both in an educated, deep way. And I have found, just from a self-interested perspective as a rabbi, I have found when both parents take their religion seriously, they take Judaism very seriously too. So there is a strong sense of Jewish identity. It's not the same as you traditionally see. People who are trying to do both are often much more involved in their children's religious life than maybe two Jewish parents who just are going through the motions. So there is an openness to doing both. People don't have to fit into the traditional categories as people once saw them. Now, that creates a lot of fear. And we're going to get into that. We're kind of identifying what the issues are now, and we're going to kind of talk about what some of the solutions, or not solutions, or approaches to addressing this trend in religious life. But there are new ways of understanding it. But this situation generates a lot of fear. And the other part where there's a lot of fluidity is, what does it mean to be religious today? I cited earlier this Gallup poll that talked about less than 50% for the first time. And both Ari and I are part of traditional synagogues. We believe in organized religion, and passionately so. And I believe that institutions like churches and synagogues matter critically, and people should belong. It's where I've put not only because, I've got a family to support, but because it really does enrich our lives. But the reality is, people are finding meaning in different ways. So I don't think that the decline in church attendance and affiliation reflects a decline in the importance of spirituality. It reflects the fact that people are looking for that same sense of meaning in different ways. So people are looking at it, pilgrimages. travel, when we can, traveling to different places, finding online communities like we're doing obviously right here, we're doing this because we can't meet in the Union League Club, but a lot of people would really find community in depth on the internet. They find people to whom they relate to. They find videos or services that reach that spiritual part of us. We all have a spiritual component to us. And so the traditional way of meeting that spiritual component was you belong to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or wherever, and you go there on Sunday or Friday. You bring your kids there for education. People are searching for that same sense of meaning and place in the world, but they're doing it in much more fluid, much more open ways. And we have to respond to that.
And they're letting all different kinds of leaders be their gurus and their leaders, and they're following a range of all different religious leaders. People have a YouTube, someone on YouTube that they love, that they're listening to all the videos. They have a podcast that's just bringing them joy and meaning. Then they have found a Christian pastor who they love. They happen to be. So people are also open to all kinds of different leaders and people to inspire them. We're not just limited anymore.
Yeah. And I think this comes down to the core question of what is religion for? What need does it serve in our lives? And for many thousands of years, maybe it was really about obedience, and it was about following God's law, God's path. And that was how we saw the world. I think today we look at religion differently. It's about meaning. It's about feeling that our lives matter because they are part of something bigger than ourselves. It's finding comfort in a harsh world, but it's also finding a way to contribute to that world. So how then, if we're not bound by the same categories, the same boundaries of early generations? And by the way, before we get into this, there's always change. I mean, the religion of the 1950s, let's say, was different than the religion of the 1850s. And the religion of the 1850s was different than the religion of the 1750s. There's always change. The fact, though, today is that the change is coming much, much faster. I mean, that's true in many areas of life. So the kind of rapid, just look at how much the world has changed since the pandemic. I mean, it's look at the landscape of downtown Chicago and where people are working. I mean, change happens extremely rapidly. I mean, I was looking at the statistics from Gallup about how many people connect with a church or synagogue. When I was ordained in rabbinical school, it was 70%. Now it's 46%. I was ordained in 2006. That fast for a 20% drop. That's rapid change. So what does all this mean? How do we respond to the kind of impermanence, the permeability of boundaries, the fluidity of identity, and where we find spiritual meaning? So one way is, as religious leaders, as people of faith, we go where people are. There's a great Jewish teaching. So there were several great rabbis a long time ago, but two of the great rabbis were Hillel and Shammai. And Hillel and Shammai tended to disagree on a lot of things. They disagreed on how you put a mezuzah, a box on the doorpost of your house. Do you put it vertically or do you put it horizontally? And they argued over things like that. And one of the things they argued about is how do you respond to when the people are doing something different than the leadership is teaching? And Hillel said, you go where the people are. You follow, you respond to the needs of the community. You don't just respond. You don't always. I mean, there are certain standards, of course, but you have to meet people where they are. And so I think that is a huge challenge for all of us as parents, as religious leaders, is meeting people where they are. What are people searching for in life, in their spirit? And in terms of interfaith, how are people relating to each other? How do we respond to the love that develops between people? How do we respond to the fact that people are interested in learning from people of different religions? You go where people are. So that's one part of it. Don't stay in the ivory tower or the gated synagogue or church. You have to go out and be where people are. All right.
Yeah. And I think, I'm running a religious school today, and you just see it across the board that parents of young children are just pulled in every million direction of survival at this point. Their children's activities, they're balancing, two working families, a lot of stress, the stress of the pandemic, screens and social media, and the mental health toll it's taken on children across the age spectrum. And then you're fitting in religion. And it has just changed the conversation in terms of what parents need and want, how we can respond, how we go about teaching the traditions in a relevant, engaging way. And change. I mean, we more one-on-one, more small groups, and some say it's the Starbucks generation where you can order exactly what you want, how you want it, when you want it, on your phone, drive up, pick up. But that's a cynical way. I think you can also look at that in a beautiful way, that people are taking ownership of religion and they do know what they want. And being in conversation is enlightening and brings us to relationship and brings us to God. But, people are experimenting, and we've seen it just with this latest Passover. Evan and I were saying, and we'll kind of wrap up and look to questions, but it used to be that you set out your Passover Seder plate and you put these same items on it every year, and that's just what you did. Well, in the past decade, the Seder plate items have exploded in creativity. Now vegans, what can a vegan put on a Seder plate? They don't want a bone. So then it went to the beet, which maybe symbolizes the blood. Well, people, and people have added all of these different items to represent migrant workers, to represent different plagues of society, to represent different modern situations. The orange got added to the Seder plate in support of LGBTQ families, in support of women in leadership positions. So we like to look at it in the positive, that having people have choice, have opinions, have desires and needs. It's a challenge for clergy for sure, but it's an opportunity.
Yeah. And before we take questions too, when Terry was introducing me, he mentioned that I'm on Fox and CNN, and this is true. Although the truth today is they don't really call me much anymore. And I think that is a reflection, and it was nice. I miss it. Fox used to send a car to come pick me up, and, and a driver, it was great. But the part of the problem is, and one thing that we try, really, at least I try hard, is religion should not be the province of one political party or the other. And that is happening. And that there's a long history to that. There's a great scholar at Harvard named Robert Putnam who wrote a book called American Grace. And he talked about one of the reasons there's been a decline in religious affiliation among the young, is especially millennials, is that they associated religion with the religious right. And they associated religion with conservative politics, and therefore they turn away from religion because that's not how they identify. And that is, I think his argument is very persuasive, and I think that is hurtful in the long run. It's very short-sighted. It may be good politics for a moment, but it's short-sighted in the long run for religious leaders. And by the way, the same danger can happen on the left too. This is not simply one party. There can be a sense that, one of my predecessors at a Macomb congregation, Arnold Jacob Wolf, he used to joke that sometimes he said Reform Judaism is the Democratic Party with holidays. And so it's a great joke. But there is some truth to that. So there is a sense that religion can get hijacked by either side. And that is a danger. So my hope is that religion kind of remains a countercultural voice as well. Mm-hmm. Is this time for questions? I would love to field a few, and I mean, we could go on forever and ever.
We can go for about 5 more minutes or so.
Okay,
for the
good.
two of you.
Okay, so in terms of religion and politics, keeping it countercultural is critical. And the other kind of larger picture that we've kind of tried to reinforce is that it should focus on, so much of life today is focused on means and not ends. And religion truly excels when it's about the ends, when it's about how does this enrich our life? How does this make us better human beings? That is really, there's this whole idea in Torah of why do we have all the commandments? Why in Judaism are we supposed to, eat certain foods and not eat certain foods, wear certain clothes and not wear other clothes? And Maimonides, who's the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages, he said the entire purpose of Torah is to refine the human character. And I think that insight is so critical today for all of us as people who are much more fluid in how we identify religious practices. Our governing criteria should be, does this refine our character? Does this make us better human beings? Now, one could say, well, what does better mean? Okay, I think we all have an idea of what a truly productive, happy, satisfied person is in the world. And we believe that religious life, religious practices can do that for us. In fact, that's some of the only, in some ways, religion is one of the few places where we can find that. I often think about, in terms of why I believe so passionately in synagogues and churches and houses of worship generally. If you think about most places in American society, there are restrictions on who can go into them. Think about a country club or even a school board. You have to live in the neighborhood. All of these are separate based on socioeconomic class, where you live, how much money you make, your ethnicity, your background, all of those. But the house of worship, the church, the synagogue, anyone's welcome there. Doesn't matter where you grew up, how much money you make, any of that. You can all find a place there. That's one of the few places in life that are truly, in some ways, as I said before, countercultural, and that can help refine our character, to remind us that there's more to life than just what we have and what we accumulate. And that is the real challenge for religious life today. How do we nurture that feeling, no matter what your religious background is, no matter what your in sense, how you see yourself today? Identity is fluid. Identity is fluid, and that's what we strive to do. Now, as two rabbis, I know one of the things that I just want to touch on is, how do we convey that to our own children? It's kind of funny. We sent our oldest daughter to a Jewish summer camp one year, and she did not respond so well to it. And I kind of figured, okay, she's got two rabbis as parents. We can give her a break on it. But the truth is, it's difficult to nurture a religious identity, Jewish identity. I'm sure it's true for Catholic parents as well, in a world that is increasingly secular. You can send your kids to a Jewish day school or a Catholic day school, but the truth is, this goes back, how do we live our lives? Do our lives reflect our highest values? And to me, and to parents that I counsel, it's really, how do you model the values of your religious tradition, of our religious traditions in your life? And that's why I go back and say, some of the most Jewishly authentic families to me are people where they're doing both faiths, where they're taking learning and giving tzedakah and doing all the things we associate with Judaism. They're doing it while maybe also doing practices associated with another religion. So in other words, it's not just about how we feel, how we identify ourselves. It's what we do.
And yeah, I think Evan and I talk about, are we passing on just like a generalized, universal, humanistic tradition at this point? Be a good person, make the world a better place, be a mensch, what it means in Yiddish, to strive to be a human in the best capable sense. As clergy, are we trying to pass on a particularistically Jewish flavor, to the lens by which you see life, or Catholic lens? And we are, because, that's the intricacies, maybe of the thread in the tapestry, but it's balanced with this other universal, shared vision, shared values. And to some extent, that's why the word interfaith, a lot of couples don't like that word because they say they have the same faith. They share the same belief in one loving God. It's the, it's the holidays are different or the cultural foods are different, but they share more than they don't. And that's, I think, this tension, it's a beautiful tension, really.
Yeah.
Well, I think we will move into our Q&A time.
Yep.
Thank you, Rabbi Ari and Rabbi Evan. Your enthusiasm, passion, and conversation indeed has engaged our hearts and minds. You still have time to submit questions in the Q&A function. Now to our questions, we'll try to get to as many as possible. But before we move into the Q&A time, your support for First Friday Club is critical to our success, and we are grateful for your previous and continued support. By going to the First Friday website, you can make a donation again or for the first time and help us provide free programming during this pandemic. That's much appreciated. So here we go. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. Some of the questions could lead us to a whole new webinar, so keep that in mind. Could you recommend a book or other reading on established communication on interfaith subjects? And a corollary to that would be, what are you currently reading?
Oh, well, I'm always reading about 3 or 4 books at once. I'm working on, often working on 3 or 4 books at once. There's actually, I wrote a book on this exact subject called What Every Christian Needs to Know About Judaism, exploring the interconnected world of Jews and Christians. And my publisher is Abingdon Press, which is the publisher of the United Methodist Church. I've written a couple books, and Father Cusick blurbed one of them. I think that was the one on Passover. So if you can look for books that I've written. There's also, and not just to toot my own horn, you don't make much money from books. So it's not something that really is, it's much self-interest. It's something I've did out of really a passion and real strong belief. But there's another author who's written a book called Being Both. I think it's Susan Katz Miller. That's another good book on this subject.
Yeah.
Ari?
Yeah, I was going to say Susan Katz Miller. You can Google her. She just writes prolifically about, she runs an interfaith community in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
How best to establish contacting meaningful communication with other people of different faith traditions, both known and strangers?
I think the first thing you do is well, when we are able to travel and go places again, go and visit a church or a synagogue. Introduce yourself. Go to an event. I know that can be hard sometimes, just in terms of feeling like a stranger. But going to places where people gather. I mean, religion at its core is about community, and so if you can't go, join a study group. I mean, I do a weekly Torah study with my rabbinic colleague, Rabbi Sarada, and we have guests from other communities frequently. In fact, we have someone who zooms in from Australia. So you can really, I think, really just being present and adding your voice really makes a big difference.
There's a local organization run by Father Corey Brost of Viator House called the Children of Abraham Coalition. And they do work with Jewish, Christian and Muslim young people, middle schoolers, high schoolers, and young adults. And that's one local organization that really is, they have dialogue groups, trainings, Thanksgiving programs, MLK weekend programs. And so that's a good organization, I think, to look for.
Several times during your conversation, you mentioned the term fluidity. Here's a couple of questions related to fluidity. What can history and our sacred texts teach us in this period of fluidity, are they still relevant?
Yeah. So there was a very famous essay written about Jewish history called The Blessing of Assimilation in Jewish History. And the idea was to sort of reclaim the positive feeling of the word assimilation and to say that throughout history, we always embrace and adapt to the larger cultures in which we live. We always, today some people criticize, they say it's cultural imperialism when people adapt clothing or hairstyles from another culture. And I don't think it is. I think that's creative adaptation. And so fluidity has always been the case. So that we have always not been bound in these strict categories that we, the way we categorize people by race, by religion, those aren't really true. Those are conveniences for demographic numbers. They're ways of doing studies, but they don't really reflect the fullness of who we are as human beings. So I think fluidity has always been true. I think today the challenge is that it's happening much faster, and that we don't know in some ways how to respond thoughtfully. And that's what Ari and I really have tried to talk about and to try to live is a thoughtful response, not based on fear. Fear is we human beings are always afraid of change. That's just in some ways how we're built. And when it comes to religious change, even more so. I mean, I'm sure there are many rabbis and pastors and priests who can relate that if you change the melody of one song, you've got like a mini revolution on your hands. People don't like change, but change is the reality, and it's happening much faster. So I think addressing that without much fear is critical.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I have talked about this, and lots of other rabbinic leaders have pointed to it. You can even go back to the days right before the temple, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70. Even right before that, people had given up on the temple practices and the animal sacrificial system. It was over. It was over to some extent. And so, there had to be change. There had to be. And then when the temple was destroyed, there was no choice. But synagogues had already started. Prayer had already started to transform from the animal sacrificial system to the words of our hearts and our mouths. So that revolutionized, modern religion. And we, to some extent, are in the same period now where we are going to possibly see some major changes and developments of religion to meet modern day. And it is scary and exciting, and we'll have to see how it unfolds.
Terry, could I make a comment here that has been triggered in my mind? Evan, you mentioned that one of the rabbis said we have to go where the people are. You go where the people are, you meet the people there. Obviously, that's true, but it's also a problem for what Ari just mentioned. I mean, the rigidity or the traditionalism is not something that just is in the bailiwick of clergy. It's within the congregations. Number of years ago, I was doing a couple presentations in Louisville, and there was a young woman who was right out of the seminary, and she was hired as a Lutheran pastor. And she left the congregation after a year because they thought just her presence would bring in younger people. They did not want anything changed. And consequently, her professional frustration was everything that she thought of was no. And it wasn't just a senior pastor who was conditioned well to a single syllable word, no, because he was threatened, but the whole congregation. And yet they would say out of the other side of their mouth, we don't have any younger people here. And so you can't have it both ways. I've been retired, we retired 7 years on July 1st. And before I retired, one of the greatest regrets of my public professional life was my inability to convince anybody but one group of people that younger people were checking out. I saw it coming maybe 15 years before it became a phenomenon. And what I saw was we were, institutionally speaking, we were congregations that were function without form. As long as the job's getting done, we don't care who's doing it. So if in the Catholic tradition an usher dies, now we get another old guy to be the usher to take his place. We don't look at regeneration. We never took it seriously. And I was all about regeneration because I worked with young adults in their 20s and 30s. I could not convince Catholic bishops. I could not convince clergy. I could not convince parish governance. The only people who I didn't have to convince were the parents of people in their 20s and 30s who were saying, my kids have stopped. They're not coming. You know, and they'll tell you they're wonderfully spiritual young people. They're for all the right stuff, but they don't see a value in going to church anymore on Sunday. And I could not get anybody to address that.
Right.
And I think now we're paying the price. That was 2 generations ago.
No question.
I had a man on the phone today. He used to bring his granddaughters to St. Clement's in the city every Sunday. And all of a sudden they said, Grandpa, we're not going anymore. And it's breaking his heart. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So we're losing the battle to secular America.
Well, that's 100%. And I think the same is true in Judaism. And it used to be people thought they would come back when they had kids of their own, right? And that's not happening.
No.
That's not happening. However, to put one positive part about it, people still need meaning in their life. People still
Right.
need community. So they're finding it in other ways. And that's why I say you have to meet people where they are, which obviously you did, you know, your whole career, but it's you know, how do we take the positive in organized religion, in churches and community, and bring that to where people are going? And, you know, one of the things that we do in our synagogue that probably wasn't done 30 years ago is people, you know, is people who are empty nesters. They have time, they have the ability, they go on trips together, on Jewish heritage trips that really reinforce a sense of religious identity. And that's people are going to travel. Here's a way to connect your faith with that travel. Or, you know, when I was, we haven't done these in a while, but would do downtown lunch and learns. People are at work, they want to break, they love to see, they love to network. Let's get together for lunch and Jewish learning. So these are kind of ways, at least, of taking the part of religion that really speaks to people, that people need in their lives, and trying to bring it where they are.
See, I work off of a principle: presume little, explain lots.
Yeah.
And I think that leads us to what is the core element of Judaism? What is the core element of the teaching of Jesus Christ in the Catholic tradition? What's fundamental? So when you mentioned earlier that you got rabbis quibbling over whether or not the mezuzah should hang one way or the other, you've got people saying, what in the name of God is a mezuzah?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we've got generations of people that have not grabbed on to any sense of learning about the tradition.
Yep.
Why is it that when Jewish people will leave their house, they touch a mezuzah because they live under the law of God, under the Torah, and there's your reminder of it. There's just so many things. For example, one of my arguments, and I get in trouble all the time, in the Catholic thing are liturgists. You know, they say, what's the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist? You can argue with a terrorist. But for example, during Lent, they decided that we would have a pot of charcoal and put incense in it at the beginning of Catholic Mass. Nobody explained what it's all about. Mm-hmm. And all it is another funky Catholic thing that people don't know what it means. Mm-hmm. But if you explain it, knowledge is power. Yeah. And I think it can get us to the core of our faiths, where spirituality is always predominant. And that's what you're asking.
Here's a similar, as a parent, how do I go about mandating church participation and attendance with my children until they are the age of 18? At the same time, how is it possible for me to have a discussion with them and support their own spiritual growth and meaning in life?
Yeah, this is such a good question. You know, we find that parents will say to their kids, well, you have to go to Sunday school. I hated it. You're going to hate it, but you have to go, you know, and it's not really helpful, actually. You know, I think that for parents, we have to come to terms with our own sense of spirituality, what it means to us. Why do we go? And we have to be able to have these conversations with our kids. Some of these religious conversations are so intimate, and you'd be surprised how many parents just don't talk about God or prayer with their kids. You just say, well, we have to go, and that's where we're going. And the kids have no idea what it even means to a parent. And being able to share with your child that you do pray, what it means to you to pray, what God has meant in your life, that's a powerful thing for a child, I think, to have some meaning. And meaning. I'm with you, Father John, all the way. We taught Hebrew for generations of just the words. No one knew what they were saying. And surprise, surprise, they don't want to do it anymore. So we've got to do the meaning piece, because yeah, if you don't understand it, and it's so beautiful when you do understand it.
Here's a question regarding young folks. Many young folks are turning to Orthodox Judaism.
Yeah.
How is that going, and what is the draw? And at the same time, are young people coming to synagogue, church for meaningful events such as baptisms, mitzvahs, marriage, death, etc., as opposed to not just the worship services?
Yeah. Well, the numbers, there aren't that many people becoming Orthodox. There really isn't that isn't manifest in any demographics. What is true, though, why someone may get that impression is that Orthodox are much more visible today than 20, 30 years ago. And the reason for that is the Orthodox community, up until the 70s and 80s, it used to be that the children would drop out, that they would become conservative or reform or nothing. That was generally, but since the 70s and 80s, with the rise of Jewish day schools, the Orthodox community has kept many, and big families, usually 4 or 5 kids, have kept almost all the kids remain Orthodox. So the Orthodox community has grown in size, primarily because it's almost there's less leakage from a demographic point of view. So there aren't many people becoming Orthodox. It's more people staying Orthodox. Now, what can we do to get people into synagogue? I think, again, you kind of meet people where they are. You try to make synagogue a place that is, at least to me, one of the key words here, we talked about fluidity. One of my key words is non-judgmental. A lot of people, when they walk into a church or synagogue, they feel judged. Oh my God, I'm a bad Jew because I haven't come here enough, or I'm a bad Catholic, because I, haven't gone to mass or whatever. That needs to be gone. It needs to be utterly welcoming. I mean, one of the things I've talked a little bit about Old St. Pat's, because I love that church and I love everything they do. They have that beautiful sign out in the front that says, whoever you are welcome here. And I think that should be in front of every house of worship. We may practice certain spiritual values here, of course, but we welcome you as you are. That has to be a priority of every house of worship.
And I think to some extent, being Orthodox is comforting in some way. The community is such a vital part of life. When you live a life very regimented by the observances you do, you create this sense where you see people at the kosher butcher, and you see them at the day school, and you see them at the shul, and your lives become interwoven in a way that it isn't true in more liberal religions. And people crave that sense of community and order, knowing what to do, how to eat, what to say. There is something there is something in that works, that ritual of it. And that's, I think people are finding that, Harvard did this major study on the how we gather, and they were looking at Soul Cycle, specifically this cycling group, where you go to a gym and you ride your bike really fast. And it's very, religiously cultish in that way, where you have your teacher who's your guru and your people, and there's ritual around it and there's garb around it. And you can really see some of these yogas and meditation groups and cycling groups in that way as well. So we have a lot, we can learn a lot from that.
So we're going to wrap up our Q&A time. I just want to say, because a question or comment did come through, this webinar is being recorded, and in the next week, it will be posted on the website. So you can watch it again, and you can encourage your friends and colleagues, or if you have enemies as well, to watch the program and become engaged themselves. In addition, your two websites or information you have for us, and the books that you mentioned earlier, we will also post on the next emailing that will be coming out. This is going to announce I don't want to take the thunder away from Father Cusick, but the Father James Martin program. But just to mention, Father Martin is a hero of Rabbi Evan and has a comment about one of his latest books on happiness. So there's that connection. The conversation today with Rabbi Ari and Rabbi Evan has been engaging and thought-provoking, making connections and thoughts about between our work, faith, values, and issues that affect our daily lives. I just want to say we are grateful to both of you for being with us today, as well as to all of those individuals who've joined us. And thanks especially for the support of all the behind-the-scene folks who made this webinar possible. Father Cusick.
Terry, thank you. And Ari and Evan, I think this is one of these kind of moments for me that you lift up the rock, you find more stuff. And I would like to put it in the head of the board of the First Friday Club that we consider keeping this topic going at another time, because I don't think there's a family system that has not seen people walk away from the tradition on a regular basis. Oh, they'll say, oh, I'm Jewish, oh, I'm Catholic, but I don't know much about it. And yet we need to talk about that a little bit more. We need to help people mind, what does it mean to be a spiritual person? And how, in a secular world, how can both of these great religions offer a sense of meaning to people who are hunger for spirituality, but not necessarily for organized religion? Because I think that's the gift we can bring to the world. So thank you so much. And I got a hunch we're going to be banging on your door again to keep this stuff going. And I know personally, our paths will continue to cross, because you've blessed us with your ministry, your love for each other, and your commitment to faith. So that's great. And folks, we got to call it a day, but we're getting together on May 7th. That's the first Friday in May. And as Terry mentioned, our speaker is one of probably the most popular Catholic names, Father James Martin. He's written recently 2 marvelous books. I've got one of them ordered. The other one is, he's got a book on prayer. Everybody says you got to read this book. And that book was mentioned last month by Cardinal Wilton Gregory when he was asked, what are some of the things that we should be reading? And the other one that we're going to focus on is, he's got a book out, believe it or not, on Jesus. And the whole point of it is, he never wanted to go to the Holy Land. And someone said in his religious order, the Jesuits, you need to go. And he said it changed his whole, once he did, not wanting to go, it changed his whole outlook on Jesus. And so he's going to share that with us at high noon on May 7th. So thank you all. Terry, for your wonderful leadership today, and Ari and Evan, throw your arms around your 2 daughters, give them a big kiss from the priest. And everybody else, thank you for the gift of your time this day. Let's go in peace to do the best that we can with our lives in God's name. Adios.